Hey everybody, welcome back. Let's pick up where we left off. This is the beginning of chapter 11 of book 2, but it's again just the next section on page 159 of Wheelock. So we have Obsidio erat nihilo minus et frumenti cum summa caritate enopia. Let's start there. So obsidio, this can only be one thing. It ends in a O, but if you know the dictionary entry, you know that this is a third declension noun. Obsidio obsidianus. So it is the subject of the sentence. So what is that? Well, that's the sitting in front of. Again, this is the siege. So the siege was. There was the siege. Minus, what does minus mean? Well, that's comparative, and that means less, right? Less nihilo. So we know nihil does strange things, but it's ultimately kind of a neuter noun. And this is then probably an ablative. This is actually what we call an ablative of degree of difference. So what does degree of difference mean? You could say less by 5 or less by a little. So we're saying, well, there's a difference. Less or more, whatever we want to have. And then there's a degree of that difference. Is it by 5? Is it by a little? So let's keep that in mind as we go back to this. The siege was, aka might have been what was still going on, less by nothing. So the siege kept going on with no let up. That's what this the whole thing means. So obsidio erat nihilo minus. The siege was continuing, less by no means, or in no way. Forget the means, less in no way. And frumenti, so this is of the corn, again, a kind of partitive genitive, cum summa caritate, with the greatest, what's that? Well, it's where we get the word charity, but it's dearness, aka price. So these are famine prices. So, and of the corn, with famine prices, there was, so again we need to kind of supply erat, there was enopia, a lack of ops, power, presence, there's a scarcity. So we have two things that were going on. We have the siege was continuing without letting up in no degree, and there was scarcity of corn with the highest price. It's supply and demand. Incredible scarcity, incredibly high price. And, again, our kind of favorite connecting and. So we've got phrase 1, now we're in phrase 2. So by sedendo, so by sieging, sedendum, a nice gerund that we have here, being used in the ablative, so by means of sieging. So what is a gerund again? We went over this a little bit. It's a verbal noun. And that means it can be treated like a noun. It can be put in the ablative. It can be an ablative of means, but it's got this verbal sense, by besieging. So we've lost the ob here. One could imagine obsedendo, but it's clear what we're talking about. So by sitting, literally, but what we mean is by besieging, expugnaturum. So you're looking and saying, what is that word? This probably looks somewhat familiar. Whenever we had this urus, ura, urum, this is going to be our future active participle. Not the future passive participle, which is the gerund, but this is how you express futurity. Sometimes this can mean about to be, but we need to figure out what this is doing. But this is about to be expugnoed. And what's expugno, expugnare? Well, that is to capture, to take by storm. So we had opugno already, which was attack, and this is kind of attack through, attack out of, really kind of take the city by storm. So and by sieging, to take in the future by storm, say, well, we don't know what the subject is yet, but that's going to be one of these. It could be ablative, but it's probably going to be accusative, singular, and then it's reflexive. So whatever the subject is, this will be an accusative form of that, so that's fine. Urbem, city, accusative, so a separate accusative. And then spem, yet another accusative. So we get 3 accusatives in a row. Again, say could be ablative in terms of its form, but I'm just giving you a hint. There'd be no reason for an ablative at this point. Porcina, again, you can have it with an E or an I, however you want it, and then that's got to be nominative, right? Well, I guess it could be ablative too, but then we have habebat. That's going to be the verb, this is going to be the subject. So we have Porcina was having, kept having hope. So he's in this process of having hope, and then what does that mean? Well, if you have hope that something, of something. We're forming, pardon my terrible ability to draw a vertical line, an indirect statement here. So Porcina was having hope that all of this, and this is why we had accusatives and here missing this essay. It's kind of gapped. I like to write that empty set equals essay. So this is our verb. This is our future verb in the indirect statement because it's a future infinitive. Latin and Livy being who they are, just decided to leave out the actual infinitive part of the essay. So Porcina was having hope that by besieging, by means of the siege, he would be able to storm, so this is the subject, the city. So literally by sieging to storm he, the city. So note, as often, in this indirect statement, normally we have subject, direct object, verb. We have the first accusative, the second accusative, and then the verb. So that's the infinitive. Here that verb's been moved to the front. We've got expugnaturum first. But that's fine. We still have to follow the rule that because this accusative precedes this accusative, this is the subject. So it's not that the city would capture him, it's that he would capture the city. So again, once we leave direct statement and we go into the indirect statement mode, we need to pay attention to the word order. Word order actually begins to matter. All right, so this was long. This has been 7 minutes and we've only made it 2.5 lines. We've got a lot to go. So all of that's the backstory. That was happening. Imperfects, imperfect here. When come Gaius Mucius. So this is Gaius, but the preferred way of abbreviating that word that begins with a G, believe it or not, in Latin is with the C. There's historical linguistic reasons for that. We don't need to get into it. But his last name, as we might say, was Scaevola. So one of these things. So Mucius, Gaius, everyone knows that there are only like 4 or 5 first names in Latin. So this is almost dummy. But Gaius Mucius, this is who we're talking about. When this happens, and who is he? Oh, well, this is good editorializing by Livy. A noble youth. Adolescens. Literally, these SC words mean becoming. So he is becoming an adult. He's becoming an adult. So when Gaius Mucius, a noble who's becoming an adult, qui, relative pronouns. So we're going to get some kind of noun clause. So this is all going back, I mean, it doesn't really matter what our referent is because all of these things are kind of in sequence. Gaius Mucius, he is an adolescent, and to him, to whom, literally, indignum. So this is dative, obviously, to whom, and the cui. Indignum, well, that could be a lot of things. Could be masculine, accusative, singular, could be neuter, nominative, or accusative, singular. We don't know yet. So, but unworthy, maybe a disgrace. Videbatur. So what's going on there? He seemed, or maybe it seemed. Third person, singular, and then it's passive. And then it's imperfect, indicative as well. But you can't read any of that, but I'm saying it and writing it, so hopefully there's, if you've got your sound turned up, you're at least following me. So to whom unworthy was seeming, populum, the people, Romanum, so the Roman people, servientum. So we've gotten a lot right here. We don't really have a good subject yet, but with this seeming verbs are like being verbs. So it's likely that these things are going to be connected. So that unworthy, it was seeming that. So we get a kind of indirect statement within this relative clause. So all this was going on when Gaius Mucius, a noble adolescent youth, to whom it was a disgrace, disgraceful, it seemed disgraceful, that the Roman people being slaves. So I'm saying being slaves in the plural because we tend to treat people as plural in English, but really what we're having is the Roman populace being in servitude, cum sub regibus esset, when they were below kings. And we skipped this part of Livy, but there were these series of Etruscan kings called the Tarquins. So the Roman people were kind of subjugated to these kings. So he seemed, to Gaius Mucius, it seemed a disgrace that the Roman people, when they were in servitude, being in servitude when they were under the kings, that is, by no war, nor by any, and this is kind of a way of doing any in the negative, by no enemies were besieged. So we're saying, even when we were slaves, right, slaves to these kings, these Tarquins, we weren't, besieged by any war or by any enemies. We had a sort of autonomy even under the kings. Now, being a liberum, this is that active present participle of what verb? Eundum. Well, that looks a little weird, but that is esse. So being a free people now, by these same Etruscans. Why these same Etruscans? Well, these kings, the Tarquins, were Etruscans. So we're getting a kind of nationalist argument here from Mucius. He's saying, we are Romans. Even when we were under these Tarquins before, we weren't dealing with war, we weren't dealing with besiegement, but now we're free, we're deciding our own destiny, and yet we are being, nice passive infinitive here, it's to me, or to whom, I guess, but I'm vocalizing for Mucius now. To me, it seems to be a disgrace that we Romans, even when we were slaves below the kings, were never attacked by a war. We're never. Sorry, let me start over. I'm not going to make it first person. I'm going to read exactly what we have in Latin. That's going to keep it easier. So all that thing was going on. Porsenna was having hope when Gaius Mucius, this noble adolescent, to whom it was a disgrace, unworthy, that the people of Rome, being servants when they were under the kings, were besieged by no war nor by any enemies. Now being a free people, so there's no nunc here, but that's the idea. When in the past, but now, being a free people, by these very same Etruscans, are being, and why do we have an infinitive here? Well, it seems disgraceful that. So this is our indirect statement. So all this indirect statement has been within this relative clause. Latin's crazy, you're getting used to it. So by these very same Etruscans to be besieged, so quorum, why is that going with Etrusques? Well, that's number and gender, so these are plural male. And then why is it genitive? Well, it's starting its own genitive relative clause here, and it translates as whose. Whose often, and then let's scroll on down, exercitus, nice fourth declension. I'll just tell you that this is accusative plural. Could be a lot of things. That's the problem with these fourth declensions, but that is a long US. So whose armies often fuderit. Well, what does that mean? Well, what is it coming from? It's coming from fundo, which is to pour, and then fudi, or footy really, is our third principal part. It's a scary looking 3. Let me try to write that again. Our third principal part, which means it's perfect. And then with an ending like erit, well, that could either be future perfect, or as it is indeed, a perfect subjunctive. So why subjunctive here? We're in indirect discourse. So the indirect discourse triggers subjunctive in subordinate clauses. It's a mouthful. I know that this page is messy. Hopefully you've been having a bit of fun following along. I'll recap at the end. And remember, this is not the end of the entire sentence, but that's where we're going to stop for now. So let's go back to the very beginning. The besiege was still going on, erat, less in no degree, and there was also scarcity of grain, partitive genitive, with the highest price, the highest dearness, famine pricing. And so that was going on, and because of that, in a way, Porcina was having hope that by besieging, he would be able to, or sorry, he would, just not, there's no able, there's just he would in the future take over the town, the city. When Gaius Mucius, a noble adolescent, to whom it was disgraceful, it seemed disgraceful, that the Roman people, being servants when they were under the kings, by no war and not by any enemies, were besieged. Now, implied, being a free people, by these same Etruscans, were besieged. So why is that infinitive again? Indirect statement. So it seemed disgraceful to him that they weren't, that earlier they had not been besieged, but now they were being besieged. So this is perfect passive, and this is present passive. That's what's going on there. So they had not been besieged earlier, but now being a free people, they are being besieged by these same Etruscans, whose armies they had often fundoed. What does that mean? Well, routed, driven, poured out in the past. Again, past being implied. So we're saying, think about what men we are as Romans, what we used to be capable of. Why are we suffering this indignity right now? That's Mucius's message. That should be our message too. Hopefully that was fun for you all, and I will see you on Thursday. Take care.